for the feast day of the beheading of John the Baptist, I will of course read from Maria Valtorta's vision of that event, which is given to us in some detail in the Gospels. But prior to that, today, I shall read something which is not recorded in the Gospels, about how John the Baptist was arrested and actually avoided being executed on that occasion. And that will give a bit of an insight into 1st century AD internal Jewish politics and machinations between different groups. So I'll read from the vision given to Maria Valtorta of the 10th of February 1945. Jesus is walking beside Jonathan along a green, shady embankment. The apostles are behind, talking among themselves. But Peter parts from them and comes forward and, as frank as usual, he asks Jonathan, "But was the road to Caesarea Philippi not quicker? We've taken this one, but when will we arrive? You went that way with your mistress, didn't you?" Jonathan replies, "With an invalid I dared everything. But you must realise that I'm a courtier of Antipas, and Philip, after that filthy incest, does not approve of Herod's courtiers." Just to pause with a bit of explanation. There's Philip the Tetrarch and there's Herod Antipas, and they govern different regions of Palestine, Israel. And you know from scripture that Herod married Philip's wife. And that is regarded in scripture as incest, even though Herod Antipas and Herodias, that woman, were not blood relations, as far as I'm aware anyway. I think Jonathan is a servant of Chusa, who is Herod's chief steward. And Chusa is married to Johanna, and that is mentioned in chapter 8 verse 3 of Luke's Gospel. It's not that I have this in my memory, as I looked it up before I started this video. So, to continue. So just to recap. "But you must realise that I'm a courtier of Antipas," says Jonathan. "And Philip, after that filthy incest, does not approve of Herod's courtiers. You know, I'm not afraid for myself, but I do not want to cause trouble to you, and particularly to the master, and to make enemies for you. In Philip's tetrarchy, the word is required, as in Antipas's. And if they hate you, how will you manage? On your way back, you can come this way if you prefer to do so. I praise your prudence, Jonathan. But coming back, I intend passing through the Phoenician region," says Jesus. "They are enveloped in the darkness of errors." Jesus responds, "I will call at the border areas to remind them that there is a light." Do you think that Philip would revenge himself on a servant for the wrong he received from his brother? Yes, Peter, they are both alike. They are dominated by the lowest instincts, and they make no distinction. They seem animals, not men, believe me. And that's where I think Jonathan is talking, as he seems to know. And yet, he should be fond of us, that is, of him, Jesus, a relative of John's. John, after all, spoke in his name and on his behalf when he spoke in the name of God. And that may be Peter. It doesn't say who's speaking, but maybe Peter speaking in the name about John the Baptist, of course. He would not even ask you where you came from or who you are. If you were seen with me, if he recognized me, or if I was pointed out to him by an enemy of Antipas's household as the servant of his procurator, you would be imprisoned at once. If you knew how much mud there is behind purple dresses, revenge, abuse of power, betrayals, lust, thefts are the nourishment of their souls. Souls? Well, let us say so. I think they have no souls any longer. You can see it ended well. But why was John freed? And Jonathan continues, because of a feud between two court officials. One, to get rid of the other, who was so favoured by Antipas that John the Baptist was placed in his custody, for a sum of money opened the jail at night. I think he must have dulled his rival's senses with the drugged wine. And the following morning, the poor fellow was beheaded in place of the Baptist who had escaped. Disgusting, I tell you. And just pause there, because hearing it may be more confusing than when I'm reading it on the text. But it just looks like John the Baptist escaped being executed on that occasion because the rival of some official was set up so that John the Baptist would be released. And that rival would therefore be executed. And that's what happened. So, to continue, I think Peter's speaking next. And your master stays there? He seems to be a good man. And as I said, the master there is the master of Jonathan, who I understand to be the servant of the servant of Chusa, the husband of Johanna, who's mentioned in the Gospels. St. Luke I mentioned. So to recap, and your master stays there? He seems to be a good man. Jonathan replies, he is. But he cannot do otherwise. His father and his grandfather were at the court of Herod the Great, and the son was compelled to be there. He does not approve, but he can only keep his wife away from that vicious court. Could he not say, you're disgusting, and go away? He could, replies Jonathan. But although he is so good, he is not yet capable of such a deed. It would almost certainly mean death. And who is anxious to die because of his soul's honesty elevated to the highest degree? A saint like the Baptist, but we, poor people? Jesus, who has allowed them to speak among themselves, comes in. Before long, in all known areas of the world, the saints happy to die for such fidelity to grace and for the love of God will be as thick as flowers on a meadow in April. Really? Oh, I would like to greet these saints and say to them, pray for poor Simon of Jonas, says Peter. Jesus looks steadfastly at him, smiling. Why are you looking at me like that? Because you will see them as their assistant, and you will see them when they assist you. For what, Lord? To become the stone consecrated by the sacrifice on which my testimony will be celebrated and built. Just a pause again. This is another way of speaking of the creation of the church to be built upon Peter. The stone consecrated by Jesus' sacrifice will be Peter. And on that stone, Jesus' testimony will be celebrated and built. And so we're speaking of the church and the evangelistic mission of the church, which will be pursued through all the realms of the world, and to the present and to the end of time. Peter continues, I do not understand you. You will understand. The other disciples who have come near and have listened talk among themselves. Jesus turns round. I solemnly tell you that you will all be tested by one torture or another. For the time being, it is the renunciation of comfort, of affections, of material profit. Afterwards, it will be a greater and greater thing, up to the sublime thing that will crown you with an immortal diadem. Be faithful, and you will all be faithful, and that is what you will have. Will the Jews, the Sanhedrin, perhaps kill us because of our love for you? Jerusalem, Jesus responds, washes the thresholds of its temple in the blood of its prophets and its saints. But also the world is waiting to be washed. There are many temples of dreadful gods. They will in future be temples of the true God, and the leprosy of paganism will be cleansed by the lustral water made with the blood of martyrs. O Most High God, Lord, Master, I'm not worthy of so much. I'm so weak, afraid of evil. O Lord, either send away your useless servant or give me strength, says Peter. I would not like to make you cut a poor figure with my cowardice. Peter has thrown himself at the feet of the Master, and he really implores him with heartfelt words. Stand up, my dear Peter. Do not be afraid. You still have a long way to go, and the time will come when you will wish only to endure your final trial. And then you will have everything, both from heaven and from yourself. I will be looking at you, full of admiration. You say so, and I believe it, but I'm such a poor man. They resume walking. And after a long interruption, I begin to see again when they've already left the plain to climb up a very high wooded mountain. Probably it's not even the same day, because whilst then it was a very torrid morning, now a beautiful dawn causes tiny liquid diamonds to sparkle on all the stems. Endless coniferous forests have been left behind, and they dominate from their height, and like green cathedrals, they receive the untiring pilgrims amongst their columns. Lebanon is really a wonderful mountain chain. I do not know whether the whole chain is Lebanon, or only this mountain. I know that I can see well-wooded mountain ranges rise in a high tangle of ridges and cliffs, of valleys and plateaux, along which torrents like light green, blue, silver ribbons flow and then fall into the valleys. All kinds of birds fill the forests of conifers with their warblings and their flights, and the morning air is perfumed with the fragrance of resins. On turning towards the valley, or rather to the west, one can see the wide, quiet, solemn sea, so pleasant to the view, and the coast, which stretches northwards and southwards with its towns, its harbours, and the few watercourses that flow into the sea and look like shiny commas on the arid land. So scarce is their water, which the summer sun dries up, and seem yellowish finger marks on the blue sea. I actually read those two paragraphs because I could have ended the video a bit earlier when the last statement was made by Peter. But I wanted to read those two paragraphs because they give an indication of the observational power of Maria Valtorta, and how we can see that she's not merely telling a story, but she's, at least if it is a story, she's pretending she's a visionary, actually seeing a detailed landscape. And remember, this woman was bedridden, didn't leave Italy, never mind go to Lebanon, didn't have any means of describing the surroundings of another country. And there's no sign she actually consulted guidebooks. So if you accept that these really are visions from Jesus, and they describe what Jesus said and did, and Mary did and said and so on, we're also getting, apart from that most precious information, we're getting detail of the topography of Palestine and its vegetation 2,000 years ago. And that's quite important, because much of it is much more arid now than it was then. And in fact, it is the detailed descriptions that Maria Valtorta has given, purely of the landscape in various settings, that has enabled those who've really looked into this work to establish that she really did see the landscape that she's describing